The soft hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound left in the clinic that evening. The last patient had gone home, the lights in the waiting area were dim, and the scent of disinfectant hung in the quiet air. Dr. Elena Hayes rubbed the bridge of her nose and leaned back in her chair, exhaustion weighing heavy on her shoulders. It had been a long day of runny noses, scraped knees, and worried parents, but she loved every second of it. This small clinic, tucked into the heart of a sleepy neighborhood, was her world. The world she had built with her own hands after life tore her dreams apart. She was halfway through finishing the day's reports when the doorbell chimed. A soft, polite sound, but one that made her frown. They were closed. Maybe a patient had lost a prescription, maybe a delivery was early. She pushed herself up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, and walked toward the lobby. "Sorry, we're closed for the day," she called out, her voice warm but firm. The figure by the door didn't move. He stood there, tall and still, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the streetlights outside. And then, as he stepped forward into the light, the words died in her throat. Elena. Just her name. Nothing more. But that single word hit her like a thunderclap, freezing her where she stood. That voice, deep, steady, achingly familiar, was one she had sworn she would never hear again. Adrian. The name slipped out before she could stop it, barely a whisper. There he was, Adrian Cole, 7 years older, maybe a little more tired around the eyes, but still heartbreakingly the same. The perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the confident posture, the cool intensity in his gaze, everything about him screamed power and wealth. But beneath it all, she saw the man she had once loved with every piece of her heart. The man who had vanished without a word, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. "I was nearby," he said softly, almost apologetically. "Thought I'd stop by." 7 years, she breathed, the words laced with disbelief and anger. "And you just stopped by?" He looked down, then back at her with eyes that held 1,000 unsaid things. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to see you." Elena's heart was racing. She hated that it was. She hated the way the sound of his voice still sent electricity through her chest, the way a single look from him could drag old memories to the surface. Late-night walks in the rain, whispered promises, dreams they built together, dreams that crumbled when he left to take over his family's empire in London. He had chosen duty over love, wealth over her, and she had learned to live without him. "What do you want, Adrian?" she asked, crossing her arms as if the gesture could shield her from everything she was feeling. "Honestly?" He hesitated. "I don't know. Closure, maybe. Or something else. I'm here on business for a few weeks. I shouldn't have come, but I couldn't stay away." Business. Of course. That was the kind of word Adrian Cole used. Safe, detached, logical. But his eyes betrayed him. They softened when they looked at her, as if he were trying to memorize her all over again. "Well, now you've seen me," she said coldly. "You can go." But he didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You look happy." Elena forced a smile. "I am." And she was, mostly. Her clinic was thriving. Her life was stable. And at home, a 6-year-old boy with messy brown hair and his father's eyes was waiting for bedtime stories and hot cocoa. Adrian Cole might have shattered her heart once, but from those pieces she had built something stronger. A new life, a new purpose. Still, standing there with him now, she felt the grass on shift beneath her feet. Old wounds she thought had healed began to ache. And somewhere deep inside, a tiny voice, one she had buried long ago, whispered a dangerous truth. She had never stopped loving him, and as he watched her with that unreadable expression, she saw something flicker behind his carefully composed exterior. Regret, longing, maybe even love. "I'll see you around, Elena," he said finally, turning toward the door. But he paused before leaving, glancing back one last time. "I never stopped thinking about you." The door closed softly behind him, leaving her alone in the quiet clinic. Elena pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady the storm inside her. She told herself it was nothing. He was here for business. He would leave again. That was what Adrian Cole did. But deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The rain had started falling just as Elena closed the clinic that night, thin silver lines streaking across the windows as the world outside grew quiet and dark. She locked the door and stood there for a long time, staring at the empty street, her heart still pounding from the encounter that had shattered the fragile peace she had built over the last 7 years. Adrian was back. She had seen his face, heard his voice, and for the first time in years, the past she had buried refused to stay buried. She drove home in silence, the windshield wipers matching the rhythm of her racing thoughts. At the small 2-story house on Maple Street, a warm yellow light glowed from the living room window. That light was her anchor, the one constant in her world. Inside, Liam sat cross-legged on the rug, building towers from blocks and humming to himself, his little head bent in concentration. He looked up when she entered, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Mommy, you're late," he said, running into her arms. The weight of his small body pressed against her chest and grounded her. Whatever storm Adrian's return threatened to bring, this little boy was her reason to stay strong. She kissed his forehead and tried to sound cheerful. "Busy day, love. Did Mrs. Carter drop off the cookies?" He nodded excitedly. "They're on the table. I saved you one." She smiled, letting his joy wash over her, but a cold thread of fear coiled in her stomach. Liam had his father's eyes. People always said so, though they had no idea who that father was. Adrian had never known about the pregnancy. She had discovered it 2 weeks after he left, heartbroken and alone. She had written letters she never sent, dialed his number but never pressed call. In the end, she decided that if he had chosen his family's empire over her, then she and her child would learn to live without him. But now, he was back. And if he ever found out the truth, everything could change. Later that night, after Liam had drifted off to sleep with his stuffed bear tucked under his arm, Elena sat by the window, staring out into the rain. She told herself Adrian's visit meant nothing, that he would handle his business and disappear again. Yet a part of her knew that wasn't true. His eyes had told a different story. He hadn't come just for closure. Something had brought him back, and whatever it wasn't over. The next morning confirmed her fears. As she arrived at the clinic, a sleek black car was parked outside, its engine humming softly. Adrian stepped out as if he had been waiting for her. He looked less polished this time, no tie, sleeves rolled up, but the intensity in his gaze was even sharper. "I was hoping we could talk," he said, falling into step beside her. "I have patience," she replied, trying to brush past him, but he followed her inside. "I'm not leaving until you hear me out." His voice was quiet but firm, and something in it made her stop. Against her better judgment, she gestured toward her office. 5 minutes. Inside, the air felt too small for the distance between them. Audra, the children's drawings pinned to the walls, the bookshelves stacked with medical journals, the photo of Elena holding a newborn baby that she had forgotten to put away. "You built this," he said softly. "All on your own?" "Yes," she answered, crossing her arms. "I had to." He turned to face her, and the silence stretched between them, heavy and full of everything they weren't saying. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, "Why didn't you wait for me?" The question struck her like a blow. "Wait. Adrian, you left. You walked away without a word." "I had no choice," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. "My father threatened everything. The company, my mother's health, our future. I thought I could come back once things were stable, but then it was too late." She wanted to hate him for the excuses, but the pain in his voice was real. He stepped closer and her breath caught. "I never stopped loving you, Elena, not for a single day." Her heart twisted painfully, but she couldn't let herself fall, not yet. "Words don't erase what you did." He nodded slowly. "Then let me prove it. Give me a chance to make things right." Before she could respond, a nurse knocked on the door, calling her to see a new patient. Elena exhaled in relief, grateful for the interruption, but as she walked past Adrian, he caught her wrist gently. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice low and certain. "Not this time." She pulled her hand free and stepped out into the hallway, but her pulse wouldn't calm. Something had shifted between them, something neither of them could undo, and deep down, a terrifying thought whispered through her chest. This was only the beginning, and before it ended, the secret she had kept hidden for 7 years might destroy them both. The days that followed felt like a storm Elena couldn't outrun. Adrian's presence hung in the air everywhere she turned, a ghost she couldn't exorcise and a temptation she couldn't ignore. He showed up at the clinic under the pretense of donating to a new children's wellness program, sending expensive toys and supplies with handwritten notes that simply read, "For them." He offered to sponsor a free vaccination drive, quietly paid off overdue bills for struggling families, and spent afternoons reading storybooks in the waiting room. It should have made her angry. Instead, it made her heart ache in ways she had sworn it never would again. But the more time he spent there, the closer he came to the truth, a truth that could tear everything apart. On a Thursday morning, Elena was rushing between rooms when she found Adrian standing by the corkboard in the hallway. His eyes were fixed on a series of colorful crayon drawings. She froze. They were Liam's. Rainbows, rockets, messy little stick figures holding hands. He had proudly signed them all in the corner with his name. "These are beautiful," Adrian said without turning. "How old is Liam?" Her throat went dry. 6, she said carefully. He nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on a picture of a tall man, a woman, and a boy with the words "Me and Mommy" scrawled underneath. "You must be very proud." "I am," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "He's my whole world." He turned then, and something unreadable flickered in his eyes. "Does his father visit?" The question sliced through her like a blade. She gripped the folder in her hands tighter, willing her expression not to betray her. "No," she said simply. "He's not in the picture." Adrian's jaw tightened, and he looked away. "That's his loss," he murmured, but his tone carried a heaviness that made her chest tighten. That night, she found herself staring at Liam as he slept, his little chest rising and falling peacefully, his small hand curled around his favorite toy car. He had Adrian's deep brown eyes, the same sharp cheekbones, even the same stubborn dimple that appeared when he laughed. She had convinced herself for years that no one would notice, but Adrian was a brilliant man, and if he looked too closely, he might start asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. By the end of the week, he was visiting daily. He sat in the waiting room with a cup of coffee, talking to parents, smiling at children, offering advice like he belonged there. The staff adored him. The kids adored him. Even Liam had started asking questions about the man who reads stories. It was during one of those afternoons that fate twisted the knife deeper. Liam's school had called. He had tripped during recess and scraped his knee badly. Elena rushed out of her office to meet him, panic rising in her chest. But when she arrived in the lobby, Adrian was already there, kneeling beside her son, gently cleaning the wound with a nurse's help. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "You're brave, you know that?" Liam sniffled, but smiled, clutching Adrian's hand like they had known each other forever. "It hurts less when you're here." Elena's heart stopped. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the sight. The billionaire who had broken her heart kneeling on the clinic floor, comforting the boy he didn't know was his. The connection between them was instant, natural, undeniable. It terrified her. "Thank you," she said quietly when Adrian stood, brushing off his hands. He smiled gently. "I couldn't let him go through it alone." That night, after Liam had fallen asleep with a bandage on his knee and a smile on his face, Elena sat awake at the kitchen table, staring at a glass of untouched tea. The walls she had built were crumbling. Adrian wasn't just back. He was slowly weaving himself into their lives, into Liam's world, without even knowing the truth. And the truth was becoming heavier with every passing day. She knew she couldn't keep the secret forever. Sooner or later, he would. see what she saw every time she looked into Liam's eyes. But the question that haunted her as the rain tapped softly against the window was one she didn't dare answer. When that day came, when Adrian finally discovered he was a father, would he forgive her for keeping it from him, or would he walk away again and shatter them both for good? The weeks that followed felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. Every step Elena took was careful, calculated, terrified of the moment she might lose her balance and fall. Adrian was now a regular part of the clinic's rhythm, appearing almost every day with the same quiet determination. Sometimes he brought coffee for the staff. Sometimes he brought new medical equipment, donations disguised as anonymous gifts. And sometimes he brought nothing at all except himself. The man she once loved, the man she tried so hard to hate, the man who was unknowingly growing closer to his own son. It was getting harder to keep the two worlds separate. Liam had started drawing pictures of Mr. Adrian at school. He asked if they could invite him over for dinner or if he could come to his birthday party. And every time he asked, Elena's heart twisted with guilt. She told herself she was protecting him, protecting them both. But with each passing day, that lie felt more fragile. One rainy afternoon, Adrian knocked on her office door with that half smile that used to melt her resolve. "I was hoping we could talk," he said. "Not about the past. About now." She hesitated before nodding and gestured for him to sit. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Finally, he spoke. "I've been thinking about everything that happened between us, and I realize I made choices back then that I regret every single day." Her chest tightened. "Adrian, no, listen," he said gently. "I didn't just lose you. I lost a future I wanted. I let Ata, her people, control my decisions, and I convinced myself that walking away was noble. But it wasn't. It was cowardly." Elena swallowed hard. His words pierced through the defenses she had spent years building. "What do you want from me?" He leaned forward, his voice soft but steady. "A second chance. Not to erase the past. I know I can't. But to build something real now. Even if it's just friendship at first. I want to be in your life again." She stared at him, her heart thundering in her chest. Part of her wanted to say yes, to reach for the hand that once held her world together. But another part screamed that it was dangerous, that it was selfish to open that door when so much was still hidden behind it. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. It was Liam's school, reminding her of the upcoming family day. She had forgotten all about it. Parents were expected to attend, bring their families, spend the day together. It was supposed to be fun, but for Liam, who had never known his father, it had always been complicated. She sighed and set the phone down. "I can't do this right now," she whispered. Adrian stood, disappointment flickering across his face. "I understand. I'll give you space, but I'm not giving up." True to his word, he didn't. In fact, his presence grew even more persistent. When a sudden flu outbreak hit the neighborhood, he personally delivered medical supplies. When the clinic received a complaint from a wealthy donor trying to shut down their free services, he used his influence to make the problem disappear. Every obstacle that appeared, Adrian quietly moved aside, like a man determined to prove he belonged. Then came family day. Elena tried to convince herself to skip it, but Liam's excitement made it impossible. The morning of the event, she dressed him in his favorite sweater and drove him to the school, her stomach in knots. Children laughed and played on the field, parents gathered in clusters, and Liam's eyes sparkled with joy. Until they land. Yid on Adrian, standing by the fence with a small gift bag in his hand. "I didn't know if I should come," he said carefully when she approached. "But I wanted to support him. And you." Before she could respond, Liam ran to him, throwing his arms around his legs. "You came," he shouted with pure happiness. The sight hit her like a tidal wave. Adrian lifted the boy effortlessly, spinning him around, both of them laughing like they had known each other forever. People nearby watched them with curious smiles, assuming what Elena had always feared, that they were a family. And in that moment, they looked like one. The day was perfect and agonizing all at once. They built paper rockets together, ate cotton candy, and posed for photos. Adrian never asked questions, never pushed too far, but every time his eyes met hers, she saw the truth. He felt something he couldn't explain, a pull he didn't understand. That night, Elena sat awake long after Liam was asleep. The image of Adrian and her son laughing together replayed in her mind over and over. She had kept the secret for 6 years, convinced it was the right thing to do. But now the walls were cracking, and deep down, she knew the truth was no longer something she could hide forever. It was creeping closer with every shared smile, every lingering glance, every moment that tied them together. And when it finally came out, because it would, nothing in any of their lives would ever be the same again. The night after Family Day, Elena barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian's hands gently guiding Liam's as they launched their paper rocket, heard the sound of their laughter echoing across the playground, felt the warmth of something dangerously close to the life she had once dreamed of. It was a vision that scared her more than it comforted her, because it wasn't real. Adrian didn't know the truth, Assad, and until he did, none of this could ever truly belong to them. But fate didn't care about her fears. Fate had already decided the moment would come, and when it did, it would not be gentle. 3 days later, that moment arrived. Liam was playing at the park near the clinic when he tripped over the edge of the sandbox and crashed to the ground. Elena was in the middle of a consultation when her phone rang. The teacher's voice on the other end was calm but firm. Liam had hit his head and needed to be checked immediately. Panic ripped through her chest as she grabbed her keys and raced out the door. When she burst into the school infirmary, she froze. Adrian was already there. He sat beside Liam on the examination table, his large hand gently cradling the boy's small one. Liam's eyes lit up when he saw her. "Mom, Mr. Adrian came to help me," he said proudly. For a moment, the sight of them together stole her breath. Adrian looked up at her with concern written all over his face. "He's okay," he said softly. "It's just a bump. I brought him here and stayed until you arrived." She checked Liam carefully, relieved to find no serious injury. But when he reached for Adrian's hand again and refused to let go, her heart twisted painfully. "Will you come with us to get ice cream?" Liam asked with a hopeful smile. Adrian hesitated, glancing at Elena. She should have said no. She should have drawn a line. Instead, something deep inside her betrayed her better judgment. "All right," she said, "just for a little while." The three of them sat in a corner booth at a small cafe, and for the first time, they looked like a real family. Adrian listened intently as Liam talked about school projects and superheroes, asking questions and laughing at his jokes. Elena watched in silence, torn between joy and dread. It was all too natural, too easy. It was everything she had always wanted, and everything she was terrified of losing. Later, as T.I. walked back to the car, Liam tugged at Adrian's sleeve. "Will you come to my soccer game on Saturday?" he asked. Adrian smiled warmly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." That night, after putting Liam to bed, Elena stood by the window, staring out into the darkness. She knew the walls of her secret were collapsing. Adrian was no longer a stranger at the edges of their lives. He was inside them, woven into their daily routines, growing closer to Liam with every passing moment. And he had started to notice things. It began with small comments. How Liam's eyes reminded him of someone, how his stubborn streak felt strangely familiar. Then came the questions. About his father, about Elena's life before she opened the clinic, about the years she refused to talk about. She dodged them as best she could, but the suspicion in his gaze grew harder to ignore. One evening, as they cleaned up after a charity event together, Adrian suddenly asked, "Was there anyone serious after me?" The question hit her like a blow. She busied herself stacking papers. "No," she said quickly. "Anyone Liam might look up to?" he pressed, his voice carefully neutral but his eyes searching hers. She froze. For the briefest moment, something unspoken passed between them. A flicker of realization, a glimmer of truth that neither dared to say aloud. Adrian looked away, his jaw tightening, and she knew that his mind was already racing toward the answer. Days passed, and the tension grew. Adrian was quieter now, thoughtful in a way that made her uneasy. He still came to the clinic, still played with Liam, still asked about her day, but there was something different in his gaze. It lingered a second too long on Liam's features, softened a little too much when the boy laughed. Then came the question that shattered her fragile illusion. It was a late afternoon, the clinic empty, and the sun dipping low behind the windows. Adrian stood in her office doorway, his voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. "Elena," he said, "is he mine?" The room spun. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. Every lie, every excuse, every moment of silence she had clung to was now collapsing beneath her feet. She didn't answer. She couldn't. And in that silence, Adrian's expression shifted, from suspicion to certainty, from confusion to heartbreak. He stepped back as if the air had been punched from his lungs. "I knew it," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I knew." And then he walked out, leaving Elena alone in the fading light, her chest hollow and trembling. The truth she had spent 6 years hiding was no longer a secret. It was out in the open now, and nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The silence that followed Adrian's question haunted Elena for days. It lingered in the corners of every room, clung to the walls of the clinic, followed her like a shadow she couldn't shake. He hadn't called. He hadn't shown up. The man who had been a constant presence suddenly vanished again, but this time the emptiness he left behind felt different. It wasn't like the first time, when heartbreak and betrayal had consumed her. This time it was heavier. This time it was guilt. Liam noticed almost immediately. "Where's Mr. Adrian?" he asked at breakfast, his voice small and confused. "Did he go away?" Elena forced a smile and lied. "He's busy, sweetheart. Maybe he'll visit soon." But deep down, she wasn't sure if he would. Adrian now knew the truth, or at least enough of it to hurt, and if she were in his place, she wasn't sure she would come back either. 3 days later, on a cold Thursday evening, there was a knock at her door. Her heart leapt before she even opened it. Adrian stood on the porch, rain clinging to his coat, eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. He looked exhausted, like a man who had been wrestling with ghosts. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. She stepped aside, and he walked in without waiting for an answer. The silence between them stretched as they faced each other in the living room. Finally, he spoke. "I spent the last 3 days trying to convince myself I was wrong," he said. "That I was imagining things, that it was impossible. But I look at him, Elena. I see myself every time he smiles. I see it in the way he furrows his brow when he's thinking, in the way he kicks a soccer ball, even in the way he laughs. I know the truth now." Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't move. "I was scared," she whispered. "You left. I didn't think you'd want him. I didn't think you'd want us." His voice broke as he stepped closer. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to know I missed 6 years of my son's life? His first words, his first steps, his birthdays, all of it. Gone. You robbed me of that." The words were like knives, but she didn't defend herself. Every accusation was deserved. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "I was trying to protect him. And myself. I didn't know if you'd come back." He turned away, running a hand through his hair, anger and heartbreak warring in his eyes. "I would have come back. I would have done anything for you. For him." The weight of what she had done pressed down on her until she could barely stand. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. Adrian was quiet for a long time. Then, his voice softer now, he asked the question that truly mattered. "Can I see him?" Elena nodded, her heart pounding. She led him to Liam's room, where the boy was asleep, curled up beneath his blanket. Adrian stood in the doorway, staring at him as if he were seeing the world for the first time. He stepped closer, kneeling beside the bed, his hand trembling as he brushed a lock of hair from his son's forehead. "Hi, buddy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It's me." Tears streamed down his face as years of missed mom ants crashed over him. He stayed like that for a long time, watching Liam sleep, memorizing every detail. When they returned to the living room, the anger in his eyes was gone, replaced by something far more complicated: determination. "I'm not walking away," he said quietly. "Not this time. I don't know if I can forgive you yet. I don't know if we can ever be what we were, but I'm going to be his father, and I'm going to be here." Elena's heart ached at the certainty in his voice. She knew this was only the beginning of a long and painful road, but for the first time in years, she felt a fragile spark of hope. The next few days were awkward and messy. Adrian visited often, sometimes just to sit with Liam and talk, other times to help with homework or watch cartoons. At first, Liam didn't understand who he was, just a man who seemed to care too much. But slowly, something began to change. He started asking for Adrian, saving him a seat at dinner, showing him his drawings. And every time Adrian laughed or smiled, Elena saw the bond between father and son grow stronger. Yet even as things seemed to heal, a new fear began to bloom. Adrian hadn't said it outright, but she could see it in his eyes. The betrayal still burned deep, and part of him was still deciding whether he could ever truly forgive her. One evening, as they watched Liam race toy cars across the living room floor, Adrian turned to her. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said quietly, "because I'm not going anywhere, and neither is the truth." Something in his voice told her this wasn't just about fatherhood anymore. This was about everything: the past, the future, the second chance neither of them had expected. And deep down, Elena knew that whatever came next would test them in ways they had never been tested before. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm Elena couldn't see but could feel pressing against her from all sides. Adrian kept his word. He was there every afternoon, showing up with books, soccer balls, science kits, anything that could make Liam smile. And it worked. Liam began to look forward to those visits, counting down the hours until Mr. Adrian arrived. But beneath the surface of their new routine, an unspoken tension simmered. Between father and son, between Adrian and Elena, and between the past and the future that was now rushing toward them whether they were ready or not. Adrian had started asking deeper questions. What was Liam like as a baby? Who was there when he was sick? Did he ever ask about his father? Each question felt like a quiet accusation, each answer a reminder of everything he had missed. And though Elena answered honestly, she could see the anger building behind his calm exterior. He was holding it together for Liam's sake, but the storm inside him was far from over. One evening, while Liam was asleep, Adrian showed up unannounced. There was no warmth in his eyes this time, only the sharp edge of something darker. "We need to talk," he said simply. Elena nodded, bracing herself. "I spoke to my lawyers," he began. "And I spoke to a judge I know. I could fight for custody. I could take this to court and make sure my son is part of my life, whether you want it or not." Her blood turned cold. "You wouldn't do that," she whispered. "Wouldn't I?" He shot back, his voice trembling with a mix of pain and fury. "You kept him from me. You made a choice that wasn't yours to make. Do you have any idea how much that hurts?" Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to look away. "I did what I thought was right. You walked away without a word, Adrian. You left me broken and pregnant and terrified, and I decided I would never let him feel abandoned the way I did." He stared at her, his chest rising and falling heavily. Then, slowly, the fire in his eyes softened into something sadder. "I'm angry. I probably will be for a long time. But I don't want to fight you. I don't want lawyers or judges. I just want my son. I want to be his father. And I want to earn the right to be in his life." The words hit her like a punch. Despite everything, the lies, the anger, the betrayal, Adrian was still fighting for them. Not with power or money, but with love. And that terrified her more than anything. The following weekend brought a moment that would change everything. Liam's soccer team had a big match, and Adrian promised he would be there. But halfway through the game, Liam collided with another player and fell hard, clutching his ankle in pain. The coach waved for Elena, but before she could reach him, Adrian was already on the field, scooping Liam into his arms. "I've got you, buddy," he said, his voice shaking. "You're okay. I'm here." Liam clung to him, crying into his shoulder, and something shifted in that moment. The boy who had never known a father now reached for one instinctively, trusting him completely. And for the first time, Elena saw that this wasn't about the past anymore. It was about a future they couldn't run from. But that night, as they sat together in the emergency room waiting for Liam's X-ray results, Adrian finally voiced the thought that had been haunting them both. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "We can't keep living in limbo. He deserves more than weekend visits and polite conversations." Elena stared at the sterile white walls, fear curling around her heart. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know how to do this." "Yes, you do," Adrian said, his voice firm but gentle. "We build something. Maybe not what we had before. Maybe something better. For him. For us." The words were terrifying and comforting all at once, and for the first time, Elena didn't immediately push them away, because deep down, she knew he was right. Liam deserved a family, and as much as she hated to admit it, a part of her still longed for one too. But the past had claws, and the deeper Adrian reached into their lives, the more those claws threatened to tear everything apart. Unbeknownst to either of them, a storm was already gathering, one that would test not only their fragile new bond, but also the very foundations of the life Elena had built. And when it broke, it would drag every buried truth and hidden regret into the light. They thought the hardest part was over. They were wrong. The real battle was only beginning. The storm Adrian feared arrived sooner than either of them expected. It began quietly, with a phone call Elena almost didn't answer. A clipped, polite voice on the other end introduced herself as Cassandra Cole, Adrian's stepmother and the current chairwoman of Cole Industries. Elena felt her stomach twist into knots the moment she heard the name. She hadn't spoken to anyone from Adrian's world in 7 years, and now one of its most powerful figures was calling her directly. "We need to talk," Cassandra said. "It's about my stepson and the future of this family. I suggest we meet in person." Every instinct told Elena to hang up, but curiosity and fear forced her to agree. The next afternoon, she found herself sitting across from Cassandra in a sleek glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline. The older woman was elegant and cold, her smile polished but empty. "I know about the child," Cassandra said without preamble. "And while I understand that emotions are involved, there are realities we must address. Adrian is set to inherit control of Cole Industries next quarter. That position requires stability. It requires a family that fits the public image." Elena's throat went dry. "Are you suggesting my son is a problem?" "I'm suggesting," Cassandra replied smoothly, "that you think very carefully about how involved you want Adrian to be. You built a quiet, respectable life. He lives in a world of boardrooms, headlines, and scrutiny. That world will swallow your son whole." The implication was clear. Cassandra didn't care about Liam. She cared about the company. And in her eyes, Elena and her son were obstacles, threats to a legacy that had been meticulously crafted. "I'm not going to disappear," Elena said, her voice shaking but resolute. "And neither is my son." Cassandra's smile faded. "Then prepare for a fight." When Elena told Adrian about the meeting, his reaction was explosive. He paced the length of her living room, his fists clenched, his voice trembling with fury. "She had no right," he growled. "None. I'll deal with her." But Cassandra wasn't bluffing. Within days, gossip sites and business blogs began whispering about Adrian's secret child and hidden family. Paparazzi camped outside the clinic. Reporters called at all hours. Patients canceled appointments. Liam's school even suggested she consider homeschooling until things quieted down. Elena's carefully built life was crumbling, and Adrian knew exactly who was behind it. One evening, he arrived at her house with a grim expression and a folder of legal documents. "She's preparing to challenge my paternity in court," he said. She wants custody battles, DNA tests, public hearings, anything to make this look like a scandal. Can she do that? Elena asked, panic creeping into her voice. She can try, he said, but she won't win. I won't let her. The tension between them deepened as the pressure mounted. For the first time since his return, cracks began to show. Arguments flared over how to protect Liam. Adrian wanted lawyers and press conferences. Elena wanted silence and distance. She accused him of bringing chaos into their lives. He accused her of shutting him out again. Then came the night that shattered everything. A reporter cornered Liam outside the school gates, shouting questions about his father while cameras flashed. The terrified boy ran into Lena's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. That night, she called Adrian and told him to stay away, not forever, but until the media storm died down. It was a decision that broke both their hearts. Weeks passed, with no contact. Liam asked about his father every night, and every night Elena told him the same lie, that Adrian was busy, that he would come back soon. But in the quiet moments after her son was asleep, she wondered if she had just driven him away for good. Then, one rainy evening, there was a knock at her door. Adrian stood there, drenched and exhausted, but his eyes burned with determination. "I'm done letting other people decide my life," he said. "I'm done letting my family control me. I walked away once and it was the biggest mistake of my life. I'm not walking away again. Not from you, and not from him." Before she could speak, he pulled out a thick envelope and placed it in her hands. Inside were signed papers. His resignation from coal industries. He had walked away from the billion-dollar empire his family had built. "For once, I'm choosing what matters," he said quietly. "And what matters is here." Elena's breath caught. She had spent years dreaming of a moment like this. But now that it was here, it terrified her. Adrian had just burned his entire world to the ground for them, and deep down, she knew the consequences of that choice were only just beginning. Somewhere in the shadows of the city, Cassandra Cole was already plotting her next move, and this time she wasn't just coming for Adrian's company. She was coming for everything they loved. The news of Adrian's resignation exploded like a bomb across the business world. Overnight, headlines screamed of betrayal, scandal, and family collapse. Billionaire heir walks away from empire, secret son at the center of corporate war. The Cole name, once untouchable, was now smeared across every newspaper and broadcast screen. But for Adrian, none of it mattered. He had finally done what he should have done 7 years ago, chosen love over power, family over legacy. But Cassandra Cole was not a woman who accepted defeat, and she was far from finished. It started subtly at first. Anonymous complaints flooded the clinic, inspections arrived without warning, and funding for Elena's community programs was suddenly frozen. But then things grew darker. A man in a black suit approached her landlord with an offer to buy the building, double its value. If she refused to sell, he threatened, there would be consequences. Elena knew exactly who was behind it. One evening, Adrian found her sitting in the dark of her clinic office, papers scattered across the desk, her face pale with exhaustion. "They're trying to shut me down," she whispered. "Everything I built. They're tearing it apart piece by piece." "I'll fix this," Adrian said, his voice low and fierce. "I don't care what it takes." But Cassandra had anticipated that. The next morning, Adrian's bank accounts were frozen pending a family legal dispute. Old business partners severed ties. Even the press turned on him, painting him as reckless and unstable, a man who abandoned responsibility for a woman and a child he barely knew. The walls were closing in, and for the first time, Elena saw fear in Adrian's eyes. Then, the final blow came. Liam disappeared. It happened on an ordinary Friday afternoon. He was supposed to meet Elena at the park after school, but when she arrived, the bench was empty. The teacher swore he had been picked up by a family driver earlier that day, a man who said he was sent by his father. Panic roared through her like fire. She called Adrian, but his voice broke when he answered. "I didn't send anyone." Hours turned into an agonizing night. Police were called. A missing persons report was filed. And just when the darkness felt unbearable, a message arrived at Adrian's private email. No ransom, no threats, just 5 chilling words. You want him. Come alone. The address was one Adrian recognized immediately, an abandoned coal-owned estate on the outskirts of the city. It was a trap, and they both knew it. But there was no choice. He had to go. He left a note for Elena before he walked out the door. Trust me, I'll bring him home. The night was cold and silent when Adrian arrived at the crumbling mansion. Inside, Cassandra waited, her expression unreadable, and beside her, holding a stuffed bear and looking frightened but unharmed, was Liam. You had no right, Adrian hissed, his fists clenched. Cassandra's gaze was icy. You think you can destroy everything I built and walk away without consequences? You're a coal, whether you like it or not. And so is he. He's not your pawn, Adrian growled. He's my son. Then prove it, Cassandra said calmly. Come back, reclaim your place. If you do, the boy stays with you. If you refuse, you'll never see him again. It was a choice designed to break him, and it almost did. The empire he'd abandoned or the family he'd just begun to rebuild. But as he looked into Liam's wide, terrified eyes, the decision became clear. You can have the company, Adrian said. You can have the name, the power, all of it. But you'll never have my son, and you'll never control me again. Cassandra's lips curled into a cold smile. Then we're at war. Police sirens echoed in the distance. Elena, refusing to sit and wait, had tracked the email and called for help. Within minutes, officers swarmed the property. Cassandra was forced to release Liam, slipping away into the night before she could be arrested. Adrian held his son tightly, his hands shaking. I'm here, he whispered. I'll always be here. But the fight was far from over. Cassandra had gone underground, her influence still powerful, her hatred now personal. And as Adrian and Elena drove home that night, the weight of what had just happened settled heavily over them. This wasn't just about love anymore. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about survival. And as the storm gathered on the horizon, one thing was certain. Their final battle with the coal empire was coming, and it would decide not just their future, but the future of the family they had fought so hard to create. The days after Liam's abduction were a blur of fear, anger, and sleepless nights. The police assured Elena and Adrian that Cassandra had gone into hiding, but they both knew that was a lie meant to comfort them. She hadn't vanished. She was planning. And if there was one thing Cassandra Cole never did, it was surrender. Elena found herself jumping at every knock on the door, every strange car parked on their street. Liam refused to sleep without the light on and clung to Adrian wherever he went. The trauma had changed them all, but beneath the fear was something else too. A fire neither of them had felt before. Cassandra had crossed a line, and this time, they weren't going to hide. Adrian began gathering evidence. Years of financial misconduct buried in coal industry's records, bribes paid to officials, threats silenced by money. With the help of a few loyal former colleagues, he built a case so explosive it could destroy the empire from the inside. At the same time, Elena spoke to journalists, sharing their story publicly for the first time. Not the scandal the tabloids loved, but the truth. About the child kept secret, the woman threatened, the man who chose family over fortune. The story spread like wildfire. For the first time, public opinion turned against Cassandra. Shareholders demanded answers. Investigators began circling the company, and the coal empire, untouchable for decades, started to crack. But Cassandra was far from done. One evening, as rain hammered against the windows, Adrian received a call from an unknown number. A familiar, cold voice spoke. You think you've won, Cassandra said, but you've only started a war you can't finish. Meet me tomorrow, alone, or I release everything. The custody files, the court documents, every detail of your past you're desperate to bury. Elena begged him not to go, but Adrian knew he had no choice. This had to end. The next night, he arrived at the rooftop helipad of an abandoned coal industries building. the place Cassandra had chosen for their final confrontation. She was already waiting, a glass of champagne in her hand, as if this were a victory celebration. "You've destroyed the company," she said, her voice calm and controlled. "But I can still destroy you. All I need to do is file one motion, one claim that you're an unfit parent, and the courts will come for him." "Do it," Adrian said, stepping closer. "But I won't stop fighting, not for 1 second. And every move you make, every threat you throw, will be one more reason the world sees you for what you are. A woman so obsessed with power she'd destroy her own family to keep it." For the first time, Cassandra's mask slipped. "He is a coal, and he belongs to us." "He belongs to no one," Adrian said. "He's not a legacy. He's not a trophy. He's a child, and he's my son." It was the first time he had ever said the words out loud, and for the first time, Cassandra seemed to realize she had already lost. The next morning, law enforcement raided coal industries headquarters. Arrest warrants were issued. Years of buried crimes saw the light of day. Cassandra was charged with multiple counts of corporate fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. Her reign was over. The world moved quickly after that. The company was dissolved, its assets sold. Reporters camped outside Elena's clinic for weeks, but eventually the frenzy faded. Life began to return to something resembling normal. Months later, on a quiet autumn afternoon, Elena stood in the backyard of their new home, watching Liam chase falling leaves across the grass. Adrian walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing everything?" he asked. "Every day," she whispered, "and it makes me grateful for what we have." He turned her gently to face him, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "I used to think love was something that happened to you, something that just appeared, but now I know. Love is a choice, and I'm choosing you, every day, for the rest of my life." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple, beautiful ring. "Marry me, Elena. Not because we share a past, not because we share a child, but because I can't imagine a future without you." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." The ceremony was small, held in the garden behind their home. Liam stood between them, grinning as he handed Adrian the ring. When they exchanged vows, it wasn't just a promise between two lovers. It was a promise to rebuild, to heal, to create a family born not from circumstance, but from choice. Years later, when Liam looked back on that time, he wouldn't remember the fear or the headlines. He would remember the way his parents looked at each other, as if they had fought the entire world and still chosen love. And in a way, they had. Because in the end, the story wasn't about a billionaire and a doctor or a secret child and a lost empire. It was about second chances. It was about forgiveness, and it was about a family that refused to break, even when the world tried to tear them apart. The past was gone. The battles were over, and for the first time, their future stretched out before them, bright, unshakable, and theirs,